What's up, everybody? Tom Pelissero here with Judd Zulgad on a Tuesday. I've been saying Wednesday all day, but it's Tuesday here. The Vikings' lone day of practice for the week leading up to the Thursday game against Tampa Bay. And I thought this was interesting today, Judd. Christian Ponder, doing his weekly media address, was asked several questions about what exactly it was that happened against Arizona, and he was able to play it off as, I've already moved on. And the thing is, a lot of guys will say that if they simply don't want to talk about an issue, but in this case, it's actually true. They had to buzz through the game film as quickly as they could. They're not doing their normal corrections period. They just have to turn all their full attention to Tampa Bay because really you're crunching a 3-day week into one.
If Christian Ponder has not moved on, there's a big problem because what you're trying to do here, and this is what's so weird about this, Tom. I mean, you're talking about, Les Frazier broke this down on Monday. Ordinarily, think about how much time you have to prepare.
Right.
The coaching staff essentially has Monday and Tuesday to prepare. The quarterback might come in and help them prepare, right? Then Wednesday and Thursday you have your hardcore practices. Friday, a lighter practice. Saturday, a walkthrough. All of that is essentially condensed into 1 or 2 days. So if guys like Ponder have not moved on, the Vikings are in big trouble because you need them to forget that game, good or bad, as quickly as possible.
And I would also imagine the Ponder, if he looked back at the numbers of the game, has to have a certain level of embarrassment just in the fact that they weren't able to be more productive. And in watching back on tape, there were a lot of opportunities, I think, that they thought were going to be there to get the ball down the field, particularly when you're seeing those 8- and 9-man boxes. But a lot of times, those intermediate and deep routes, there are a variety of different things that went wrong, particularly when they were looking for Jerome Simpson. At times, if Adrian Wilson bailing out over the top. On another play, Patrick Peterson sinks underneath that route. Okay. On another opportunity late in the first half, on the one that Ponder ends up throwing the interception, he's got Simpson on a deep in cut. What happens? Paris Lennon blitzes up through the A-gap, knocks Brandon Fusco back a little bit, and all of a sudden that passing lane's gone. They had those opportunities there, but all of a sudden those windows close, and what you got to do is when that happens, take your lumps and move on.
Yeah, but how do you find a way to exploit what defenses are going to do? Because the blueprint is there now, right? I mean, you're not going to let, if you're an opposing team, with the way Adrian Peterson's going right now, you're not going to let him beat you. You're going to continue to bring 8 or 9 men up. The Vikings do have to find a way to exploit some of those things because, I mean, you still have Jerome Simpson.
Sure.
We talked about for 3 games, right? For first 3 games, Jerome Simpson's not there. If Jerome Simpson's there, it'll make a difference.
But is Jerome Simpson truly there?
Well, because then that becomes a question. But the Vikings have to find a way to open things up here a little bit because if they sit there and say, well, the deep shots aren't there, but yet there's 8 or 9 men in the box, eventually, especially in December of this year, it's going to catch up to you.
I would say this with Jerome Simpson, too. And even go back before the back issue flared up, and he ended up being a non-factor against Tennessee, sat out against Washington. Go back even further. Where he's made an impact so far has not been over the top. If you think about it, he gets interfered with on a couple of plays. He's not beating somebody by 2 steps on those plays. He's running shoulder to shoulder. And in the Arizona game, if you watch back to the tape, the moment that William Gay extends his arm, Simpson stops running and starts pointing at his arm. The ball's still in the air.
Yeah,
he just stops. It's not as though he's running past people and they're diving and taking out his legs. He's been running side by side with people.
Right.
They haven't seen that vertical part of the game really open up with Jerome Simpson yet. Yeah, he caught a hitch against Arizona. He caught, I think, 4 balls total against Detroit, but we haven't seen him really go over the top yet. That's where you're starting to see him on more of those intermediate routes, some of those in-cuts, those deep slants. That's where it seems like they're going to try to make their hay, but you're still lacking somebody who's going to be able to take the top off the defense, where you are seeing single safety coverage on, in the Arizona game, 70% of the snaps.
Jerome Simpson was targeted once and caught 1 pass officially because the PI didn't count. So 1 pass for 8 yards is not going to get it done. The competition is going to get tougher. Teams are going to figure out what they need to do against the Vikings. Ponder needs to play better, but they also need to have more options there. Or Adrian Peterson is eventually going to, as he did in 2007, 2008, just get beat up physically. That's what teams are going to do. It makes perfect sense. And like I said, you know, Tom, they play Tampa Bay, then they go to Seattle, tough defensive team. Then they come home and play Detroit, a game that they can certainly win, especially what we've seen for the Lions of late. Then you have the bye, but then you start with Chicago. And once you start with Chicago, it's going to get a whole lot tougher. Offensively, Musgrave, Ponder, Simpson, whomever is going to have to figure this thing out a little bit more, or it's going to be a long month of December.
And defensively, it was interesting seeing their game plan, which involved not a single blitz against John Skelton. But as I told you on your show this morning, it's real easy to take that tact when you know the guy has no chance of getting out either. You know exactly the spot from which John Skelton's going to throw that football. And what they were able to do, I think, was simply bring enough pressure with their 4 against the Cardinals 5, who have struggled all season. Right. They were able to get enough heat on the quarterback. Clearly, they were able to sack John Skelton. He was not going to break out of the pocket. He was not going to do to them what Robert Griffin III third did. There's a danger in blitzing athletic quarterbacks because they can do exactly what RG3 did and run the length of the field. There's less danger in blitzing a guy like Skelton, but they also know, just like they did against Detroit, they were going to take away that downfield weapon. They were not going to let Larry Fitzgerald beat them, so they played a ton of two deep coverage again, rushed with 4, and when you're getting that level of pressure, it doesn't matter that the quarterback, if he extends the play, is going to be able to have those voids open up and hit some people.
Right.
The pocket was closed so quickly on Skelton, it wasn't going to work. That's not going to work against every single guy, though, that you're facing going forward, particularly guys like an Aaron Rodgers or like a Jay Cutler, who are really good at moving in and out of the pocket, changing the angles on you, and extending the play.
And I got to think that Tampa Bay is going to have a slightly better offensive game plan. The thing that amazes me about the Cardinals, too, and yeah, their quarterbacks, since Kurt Warner left, they haven't been good. Kevin Cobb didn't impress me at all last year. John Skelton doesn't impress you. But also, they come in with these game plans that aren't hard to figure out. They really aren't. And if you play a Tampa 2 defense like the Vikings do, it really plays into that, because the ideal thing with the Tampa 2 is to get pressure with the front four, which the Vikings did all day against a terrible offensive line. That Arizona matchup from a defensive standpoint for the Vikings was absolutely ideal. I got to think Tampa Bay is going to have a better plan. I got to think Vincent Jackson's going to be in that game plan, because the thing that amazed me was Larry Fitzgerald, as we talked about throughout the game on Sunday, there were opportunities. Larry Fitzgerald could have been the intended target, what, a dozen times?
He had enough times where it seemed as though he had a favorable matchup.
There were favorable matchups, and for whatever reason, the Cardinals never took advantage of those matchups.
But you know what part of that was, too, I think, is one of the principles of playing a press coverage, whether you're in man or whether you're in zone, is if you get your hands on the receiver, if that guy's the first read for the quarterback's going to come off that receiver. That's why Chris Cook, even though he's a better zone corner than a man corner, according to every scout I've ever talked to about him. The reason that he can fare okay in man coverage, and the reason he's so successful when he's playing well in cover 2, is because he can get his hands on the receiver. Yeah. Now you've bought yourself time. It's taking the receiver longer to get off, and if the quarterback, if that's his first read, he's going to come off that receiver. We've seen that a bunch of different times. I think you're going to increasingly see them put Chris Cook in that technique. You can change any defense. Sense. You're not going to do it when you're playing cover 3, because you need to be able to bail out and cover the deep third.
Right.
But when they're in cover 2, I think you're going to see less of that trap version where they're playing 4 yards off. I think you're going to see them let Chris Cook get his hands on people a lot more often, because that's simply what he does best.
He does, but teams need to adjust a little bit too, right? I mean, if you've got Larry Fitzgerald in your offense, which the Cardinals do, I understand if he gets redirected, that's a problem. But there has to be a certain level of patience there, and teams have to understand. I mean, this Vikings defense is way better than I expected. But there are weaknesses. There are some things that can be exploited. And as we go deeper into the season, those things are going to show up on film. And I would think that opposing teams, slowly but surely, are going to at least start to try and exploit some of those things. This defensive backfield is far superior to last year. There's no question about it. Guys are healthier. Harrison Smith's a big improvement at safety. Nonetheless, there are some things I think that teams can attack, and you're going to see it eventually.
Number one thing that they were working on before practice today, tackling. Take down the dummies a few times and make sure that you're focused in.
Harrison Smith, despite the interception for a touchdown, despite the fact he's played very well, Harrison Smith is a guy who should be a good tackler. There were times on Sunday where he just came up, tried to make shoulder tackles, and the guy bounced right off him.
It's not going to work.
I mean, you've got to wrap the guy up. It's a fundamental principle of football, and that's the type of thing that if you're playing a good team, and I don't think any of us think Arizona's all that good, if you're playing a good team, they're going to take advantage of.
Wondering if Jasper Brinkley's wearing down, too, based on how he played in that game. He's Judd. I'm Tom. Full Vikings coverage, as always, at 1500 ESPN.com. We'll see you at the Metrodome on Thursday.